Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to stay updated with all our latest content. Join us and never miss out on the excitement. In the roof of the department store, a handcuffed and delirious Merle Dixon sits alone, talking to himself about a violent incident from his past. Suddenly, he snaps back to reality and begins panicking as some walkers start to clamor at the padlocked stairwell door. Merle becomes hysterical, desperately trying to break free. He prays to God for forgiveness and then spots a hacksaw from the overturned toolbox, and his resolve suddenly strengthens. Taking off his belt, he repeatedly tosses the buckle end to try to reel in the hacksaw, lying just out of reach. On the road, Rick is driving to the camp, while Morales advises him not to dwell on Merle's abandonment, claiming that nobody will miss him, except for his brother, Darryl. Rick listens in silence. In the camp, Lori gives Carl a haircut while Shane promises him that they will catch frogs at the quarry so they can eat their legs. Lori expresses her disgust at the thought, while Shane tells her she'll be begging for more once she tastes them. Their moment is interrupted by the approach of Glenn's Challenger alarm blaring. Amy rushes to Glenn and demands to know if her sister, Andrea, is okay. Dale tells Glenn to turn off the car alarm before walkers hear. Jim disconnects the alarm while Amy continues to ask questions about Andrea. Glenn tells her everyone's okay, except for Merle. Shane chastises him for drawing attention to their location. The cube van arrives. Andrea and Amy tearfully reunite, as do Morales and his wife, son and daughter. Lori and Carl briefly watch the happy reunions before Carl becomes emotional and Lori leads him away. Shane watches them, sympathizing. He then asks Glenn how they made it out of the city. Glenn says a new guy helped them, while Morales adds that he's a police officer. He then tells an exhausted and apprehensive Rick to come meet everybody. Rick emerges from the van and recognizes Shane. The two trade stunned glances as Carl tearfully lifts his head and Lori's eyes follow. He spots Rick and runs into his open arms. Lori stares at Rick, but she tearfully embraces her husband and son. Shane and the rest of his group watch on, dumbfounded. Lori looks up at Shane, who attempts to smile away his obvious pain. Lori cries into Rick's shoulder while Rick turns to smile at Shane, who does manage an honest smile in return. In the night, around a campfire, Rick describes the disorientation he felt waking up alone in the hospital. Lori explains she was told Rick would be brought over to Atlanta, but it never happened. Carl says Shane told him he died. Rick states Shane had every reason to believe he did, and he thanks Shane for looking after his family. Both Shane and Lori shoot awkward glares at each other. Nearby, Ed Pelletier stokes his family's fire with a fresh log. Shane intervenes, instructing Ed to take the log out so they can't be seen from a distance. Ed tells him to mind his own business, but concedes under Shane's forceful command and instructs his meek wife Carol to pull the log from the fire. Ed then glares as Shane bids Carol and their daughter Sophia good evening. Back at the group's fire, Dale asks what they should tell Darryl about his brother. Andrea reasons that Merle was out of control, but Dale reasons that they can't tell that to Darryl. Rick volunteers to deliver the news, as does T-Dog, still filled with guilt for dropping the key. He tells the group that he stopped to chain the stairwell door before he ran for the van. In their tent, Rick says goodnight to Carl. Rick then takes Lori's hand as he crawls into bed with her. He tells her he knew she and Carl were alive because their photo albums were gone when he returned to their house. Lori smiles and pulls one open. They reflect on their past mistakes and are grateful for the second chance that they have been given. Lori returns Rick's wedding ring, which had been removed when he was in the hospital. Outside, Shane, keeping watch on top of the RV, stares with malice and jealousy at Rick and Lori's tent as a thunderstorm builds in the night sky. The next morning, Rick wakes to find a fresh pair of clothes laid out for him inside the tent. He gets up and gets dressed. Outside, he finds Carol ironing his freshly laundered uniform, though she laments how much harder it is without her old Maydag. Rick thanks her for her kindness. Nearby, Glenn mourns as Morales, Dale, and Jim strip the Challenger down for parts, taking gas for the camp's generators. Rick then sees his wife hanging laundry with Andrea and Amy. She asks if he slept okay and grins, saying she didn't want to wake him, before she catches a look in his eye. Shane arrives back at camp with more water, and Rick tells Lori he plans to return to Atlanta. Lori is shocked, but their discussion is interrupted by screams. Carl, Sophia, and Jackie, who had been out walking, run into camp deeply shaken. Sophia calls out for her mother, and the men grab various weapons from the campsite. Rick, Shane, Jim, Morales, and Glenn run past them to a clearing where a walker is devouring a deer with crossbow bolts sticking out of it. Amy and Andrea follow. The 5 men beat on the walker until Dale arrives and decapitates it. Dale wonders why the walker has made it this far up the mountain into the camp. Jim theorizes it is because they are running out of food in the city. The group hears the bushes rustling and Shane raises his gun protectively. Darrell Dixon emerges from the woods carrying a crossbow and hauling over a dozen dead squirrels. He's upset that the walker ate the deer he'd been tracking for miles, and the food has been wasted. The walker's decapitated head starts grinding its teeth, growling. Amy and Andrea take off back to the campsite, disgusted. Darrell fires his crossbow into the walker's head. He mocks the group for not realizing they need to destroy a walker's brain to permanently kill one. He then walks into camp, calling out for Merle. Shane follows, telling Darrell that Merle didn't make it back. Rick chimes in, confessing he left Merle handcuffed to the roof as the group surrounds them. He introduces himself to Darrell, who doesn't want to hear it. Enraged, Darrell throws the dead squirrels at Rick, who ducks as Shane throws Darrell backwards. T-Dog sees Darrell pull a knife and warns Rick and Shane, joining the scuffle. Rick is able to disarm Darrell, and Shane locks him in a sleeper hold. Rick tells Darrell he plans on heading back to Atlanta to find Merle. Later, Rick prepares to leave with Darrell. Rick admits he wants Glenn to come along because of his experience getting in and out of the city. T-Dog decides to tag along as well, to make up for his mistake. Shane argues with Rick that they need everybody to protect the camp in case more walkers show up. However, Rick contends they need more guns, which he'd be able to retrieve from the bag he dropped outside the tank. Shane softens, knowing the value of more guns, but Lori still isn't convinced and continues to plead with Rick not to risk his life for a man like Merle. Rick explains to her that he also needs to collect his walkie-talkie from the bag so he can warn Morgan Jones away from the city. He claims he owes them his life. Shane also recognizes that the walkie-talkie would be better than their CB. Lori gives up arguing, and Carl tells Rick he's okay with his reasons for going back to Atlanta. Rick and T-Dog cut a deal with Dale for a set of bolt cutters to cut the chains on the door. Dale agrees in exchange of one of the guns Rick intends to collect, while Jim wants to be able to strip the cube van for parts that they can use for the old RV when they get back. Shane then gives Rick the last of his bullets for his revolver. Rick loads his gun in the passenger seat while Darrell drives out of camp and the group watches as they exit the campsite. In their tent, Lori frets about Rick. In Atlanta, the group parks beside a railroad line. Darrell threatens T-Dog if Merle's not okay, but T-Dog insists that the undead can't get through the chains on the door. As they travel on foot below a highway overpass, Glenn decides the group should go for Merle first, because going for the guns would mean doubling back. Lori looks for Carl. Dale tells her he should be down at the quarry catching frogs. In the quarry, Shane and Carl try to catch frogs with a bucket and net. Shane falls in the water trying to drive them to Carl, and instead they splash each other playing. Nearby, Andrea, Amy, Carol, and Jackie do laundry and discuss the division of labor. The women then discuss the luxuries of the pre-apocalyptic world that they miss, with Carol missing her washing machine, Amy missing her mobile phone, Jackie missing her coffee-making machine, and Andrea missing her vibrator, which results in the women burst into laughter when Carol states she misses her too. Lori arrives at the quarry, ordering Carl to return to camp. After he leaves, Shane tells her not to take it out on him, and Lori warns him to stay away from her family. Shane asks Lori if she thinks he's not happy about Rick's return. Lori states Shane was the one who told her Rick died. Ed, frustrated over the women's laughter, approaches them and demands they stop laughing and continue cleaning. Andrea throws the sponge at Ed and refuses to work. Ed then demands that Carol comes with him, but Jackie rebukes that they know of his domestic abuse to Carol. As Ed tries to grab Carol, he slaps her across the face. Shane, upon witnessing Ed slap Carol, and still seething over his confrontation with Lori, pulls Ed away from Carol and proceeds to beat him to a bloody pulp. He warns Ed that if he lays another finger on Carol or anyone else in the camp, he will beat him to death. He then leaves Carol to tend to her battered husband on the floor. In Atlanta, Rick, Darrell, Glenn, and T-Dog return to the department store. Darrell kills a walker in the store with his crossbow. They cut through the chain on the stairwell with the bolt cutters and emerge onto the roof. On the ground, the hacksaw sits beside a severed hand with bloodied handcuffs hang from the pipe above. Darrell screams as the others look on helplessly. See you in the next video.